thought I might begin by telling you why I'm interested in engineering. But perhaps before that I'll tell you why I became a folklorist. I'm interested in how skills and traditions are handed on from one generation to another, and often without the help of any textbook, by demonstration or by family tradition or community tradition. And that can include everything from any skill really, whether it's musical or literally, quite honestly, how to cut your bread. And there might be at least one person here who will relate to the fact that some of this interest came from my crofting background in Skye, my mother's people. I grew up in Skye, and I didn't know. I can remember the first electric light I saw. I was nearly 8. So that'll just put you in the picture. And I became interested in engineering possibly before that through my father's connection. My father's family are engineers, generations and generations of them. They would get together and they would talk about Uncle so-and-so on the Battersea Power Station and Uncle somebody else on the Tower Bridge, and then what about the fourth rail, and on it went. So this is my father's job in Skye, the Storr Lochs hydro scheme, and of course it was all part of that huge movement from the 30s actually and onwards that brought big changes to the Highlands. And that is the generating station. There's about 600 and something steps up there, and there was a little funicular railway which I enjoyed. And this is right before it opened, when my boilermaker grandfather was coming to inspect the machinery, and another relative who worked with Rolls-Royce engines was coming to inspect the rest. So you couldn't miss. This is our idea of a family outing. How could you miss? But to go back further, I didn't ever see it built, but I wondered why in the world my father, a Glasgow-trained civil engineer who worked with a firm, A&J Means, would be interested in doing this. I had no idea the scope and the breadth of the training that you all do, all in the name of engineering. But the key is that it was a metal frame construction, and the firm that he worked with or began training with was a firm that specialised in this. And this is the drawing office, 1938, before the war. Of course, the war changed all that, not that I was around during the war, I'm a post-war baby. But I always felt that right through his life, there was lurking not far in the background was his experience of wartime military methods. Always learning, as engineers always are. We moved to the Isle of Lewis in the mid-50s, again to make some changes that needed to be made. There were 2 major ones. Oh, there was a bit before that, I told you a fib. I didn't go there. Scrabster. This is the little Scrabster Harbour in the north of Scotland, as it used to be in the early 50s. A beautiful little peaceful harbour. But that's about to change, especially that body of water right in the foreground. It's now filled in, thanks to one engineer, George Bennett. 13 shell-makes tanks are being built there for storage for the oil industry that hasn't yet begun. So we're planning well ahead. And that's the way it was in more recent years. I believe they've just been decommissioned. So that's the background. But the Isle of Lewis, very few roads were paved in the mid-50s. It's a big change from Skye with its mountains and coolants, but there was no water schemes. There was no water schemes at all, and that was the challenge. Putting a water scheme in across 16 miles of bog. And it was the first water scheme in Britain laid by helicopter. So there were quite a number of challenges. I was interested in talk just a few people, and with your interest in the various bodies of water and so forth, whatever your terminology is. Well, this was one of the urgent jobs in the 50s, because it's the isthmus that connects the Eye Peninsula to the mainland of the Isle of Lewis. And had that not been seen to in the 50s, it would be another island now. So you were interested in, who was it? Yeah, you were interested in the power of waves, really. Well, we lived on this little stretch of land at the other end, and in the worst high tide and high wind, a post office van was lifted completely from the road and taken and planted in a loch, which happens to be in the middle of the isthmus. There's quite a lot of power there. but there's a wall on each side, and I do remember the discussions on the shuttering that made that wall, and the fact that it wasn't just a perfect arc of a circle, but it also had to have a perfect curve so that the water would sweep back out again as it swept in. And I'll speed the camera on. Yes, there were years in Canada when my father thought he didn't want to hang up his hard hat. Canada was the answer in the 60s. He was there for 43 years. And in retirement saw this. They were about to demolish 4 arches in Halifax, Nova Scotia's most historic site, the oldest Scottish-built arches. And being a Scottish-trained engineer, that was very close to his heart. John Sang, the man who perfected the arch, he happened to have a word and said, you don't actually have to demolish them. They can be taken down stone by stone. They can be incorporated in a new building. And there they are. Can you see them inside that building? That was just a hobby. He did that as a hobby consultancy towards the end of his, when he could choose a job. But that was my upbringing, or my adult life as well. There was always engineering in the background. As a folklorist, I've always recognised that very few advances in science or medicine would have happened without tradition. We would not, for example, have digitalis, the heart drug, had it not been for an old traditional remedy. We wouldn't have aspirin if it hadn't been for the fact that it was observed that people used to chew willow bark, acetylsilic acid, which made the aspirin. There are so many derivatives from tradition that I have spent my life, and that was my idea too. So about 4 years ago, as we watched one industry after another close down, we'd seen the last of the mines in the 80s and the last of the British mines just within months ago, that if nobody spoke to the people who worked in these industries, how will we ever know what it was really like, apart from the textbooks they used? So I had the idea to try and invite them to tell their stories, whatever they might be. I had no idea who was going to arrive. I anticipated textile workers, miners, brick workers, railway workers, hydro workers maybe, and I couldn't really plan until people appeared, and appear they did. There was a lot of stories to tell. I'm not going to obviously take you through all of them, but the millwork, the textile industry was huge. It was the main industry in the lowlands of Scotland. The flax industry, then cotton, then jute during the war, in the 1700s onwards. And those mills were connected, of course, to incredible water systems, lades, because it was before the advent of steam power, it was water power. So there are huge water systems that would take advantage of whatever body of water could be harnessed to power the mills. This one's in Stanley in Perthshire. And yes, I got to talk to people who worked there to tell me what their very particular job was. So it is voices from all of these sectors of the workforce. Looking at the map from the late 1700s, the area had obviously had the hand of many engineers, and I wondered what that was all about. In the statistical account of the late 1700s, you can see this one little town. There's a large farm, the soil is barren, and the hand of industries worked wonders for more than 30 years. And he talks about the 80 acres of land which was devoted to bleaching cloth. I was to learn that this was the biggest bleach field in Britain, that all the mills of Lancashire even sent their cloth here to be bleached. And of course the mills sprung up spinning cotton and several industries. And if you have a mill, you need engineers. In the following statistical account, it had actually developed quite considerably. It wasn't just 500,000 yards of cloth, but there are 2 million yards of cloth bleached here annually. And then they began to introduce chemical bleaching and the machinery that put it through the various stages of the process. I can't pretend to understand it all, but I had a good look. It's most unimposing when you go to the place. These little brick buildings with tall chimneys, now defunct, closed in '96. But inside, girls who worked in some areas. And then, obviously, huge amount of work to be maintained, the various machines of the bleach field. And then the spinning and the weaving. Talking to the people, it was a very almost closed community where generations, these are two women whose fathers and grandfathers worked in these mills. And adjacent to that, of course, there was the maintenance. I wondered who cleaned out the lathes, because I've watched lathes choked with weeds and debris and spill over and cause all sorts of hazards in just this last winter. But in fact was told that every August bank holiday, everybody who wanted could have a holiday. And if you needed a little extra money, just volunteer to clean the lathes. I think we should bring this back, actually. And we had a big picnic with the families, and all of the lathes were cleaned and maintained. And there's not the occasional, there are occasional accounts of catching a salmon in the lathe. That was one of the perks of looking after the lathes. There was also the shuttle-makers. This woman is holding a shuttle made by her grandfather. 4 generations of shuttle-makers. It's remarkable. And they perfected. It goes back to that time when Adam Smith, whose book pretty well changed the world, studied that all-important factor in producing anything, the division of labour. Perfect your area of labour absolutely to perfection, and have a chain of workers that will link up, and you'll have efficiency. There was actually good inventions as well. This actually improved the health and safety of mills all over the world. India, Indonesia. This side-tipped shuttle, you can just picture it. There were terrible accidents in the mill, usually with facial injuries to young women. What would happen would be that the tension on the spool would loosen suddenly, and the shuttle would fly out the side of the mill, injuring the girl in the next machine. So the idea was to put a side-tipped shuttle so that if the tension released and the shuttle flew, it would be stopped at the end. Very simple, but very ingenious, and it absolutely revolutionised spinning. As I look around, or you look around at other industries, every single one comes with the word engineering. It doesn't happen without engineers. Brickworks, there's not a single brickwork left in Scotland. Until not so long ago, Fife alone had 16 brickworks. But the one that made me look everywhere was this. Yes, linoleum. I was rather put off the idea of going to Kirkcaldy in childhood because of that poem. And you can always tell by the queer-like smell that the next stop's Kirkcaldy. Everybody learned that poem. And going there and going to the huge gallery and museum they have on it, if you ask a simple question, and who made the machines that made the linoleum? They say, no, we're just going to show you linoleum, like it fell from heaven. But what about the machines and the people who invented them and made them? Oh no, we didn't ken about that. However, it's always been a bit of a thorn in the flesh of the people who did make it. And this particular company, Melville-Brodie Engineering Company, as you can see right on the top of what they did, was linoleum machinery, complete and installed. They made all kinds of machinery, and in fact, Brodie of the Melville-Brodie is the man who invented the machines, 9 of them. And it's very exciting to discover that this ordinary man, I'll show you his photograph in a minute, who began his apprenticeship at the age of 13, was an engineer at 19, invented this stuff. So you'd all be out there earning your living by now, sorry. Goodbye college. And he didn't go to, well, it's not quite true to say he didn't go to college. But the people whom I spoke to begin with phoned me up, or wrote to me actually, and they said, we'd love to write the history of our firm. And here's 2 of them. They came to visit me. And yes, I probably would have, no, I wouldn't have tidied the papers even if I'd known they were coming. This is what a folklorist does. You listen and you record hours and hours and transcribe all the gems, because there are many gems of wisdom and information. And it's in their own words. So this book is not got it's not got standard English spelling. If they say I didn't ken, that's what is written on the page. On the, this is Dougie Reid, who was a turner, and then when he finished his apprenticeship he worked with British Steel eventually as an inspector. And this man here was is John Gregg, who was a pattern maker, and when the firm closed down, he became a technical teacher in schools. Very skilled people. But going back to the start of the firm, it began as Melville Engineering, making only looms and spinning machines for the industry that was the big industry of Kirkcaldy at the time. And in the back row is a very small apprentice, age 13, from Dysart. And from that age, he learned for 5 years most of what he needed to know for the rest of his life. But in that time, just before he began, the parish of Kirkcaldy, just checking on it, a spirit of enterprise prevails. The progress and prosperity of flax spinning called for engineers and machine makers. Large and important part of this branch as the trade has sprung up, and he goes on to tell us about millwrights and founding of brass. 200 men in 3 works, 15 shillings a week, that's 75 pence a week for those of you who are not all decimalised. But it was quite a remarkable situation. But that had been going on actually for quite some time. The previous statistical account notes that the port has a buzz of activity with ships trading in North and South America, the Mediterranean, France, the Baltic, Cape of Good Hope, Norway. They had the earliest version of a European Union. They did. And they mention also, very significantly, the arrival of whaling ships from South Georgia, delivering 900 tons of whale oil to all those machines. Whale oil, quite a nice smell around the place. But the town itself, Kirkcaldy, which we probably bypass as being maybe a bit run down, what was it like at the turn, in 1800? Well, it had a post office, twice a day delivery, 15 schools where you could learn Greek, Latin and French, 5 libraries and a mechanics library. It had a scientific association with public lectures every week, and it had 54 pubs besides. So there we are. This is Burt Brodie, age 40. He had a great inclination towards design, and he's in the drawing office, having just been invited back by his own firm, which he then becomes co-director of, and from then on. These are the machines that he invented. The linoleum, this is a 6-roll Melville-Brodie invention for linoleum. A pump, again, custom made in the factory. What's this one? This is a linoleum printing machine. So they had highly mechanized ideas and very advanced. They would build any machinery and they shipped it all over the world. They provided paper mill machinery for Algeria and for Yugoslavia. It was worldwide. But I really wanted to talk to people who worked there. Where are their voices? What was it like your first day at work? I wanted to ask them. Something you might all consider. So this is Bob Thompson. He's 95. And he began his apprenticeship in 1935, before the war obviously. He had just become an engineer and he chose to be a turner. He was highly skilled. But how does that skill come about? Well, at the age, he started at 14, and all of the boys, and it was only boys then, girls came in later by the way, they did accept women, but usually as tracers, and they were in the drawing office, highly skilled. I had some photographs of their work as well. But as far as the machinery went, at that time it was just men. And he described how they tested your metal to see if you could listen and take instructions. I said, what kind of instructions? He said, well, the first day, he said, you'd come in at 6:45 and light all the fires. There was fires in every department, about 15 fires, and you lit them all, and it was freezing cold, so you went back to the first one, which was good and warm by the time you got there. He said, get a wee heat, and you would be surrounded by the journeyman engineers, and they'd say, get away from here, this is men's talk. They would test your metal. They would send you for things like a rubber hammer or a glass chisel, or go for a long stand, and you had to do this. They had to learn to, if you like, to stand on their own feet. The boss whom I showed you, this picture I showed you at the beginning, had suddenly become very affluent, or gradually became very affluent. And I interviewed his daughter in her 90s. She was born when he was 60, by the way. And I'm afraid I asked the all-time stupid question, as a folklorist, you occasionally do ask. I said, so, could you explain to me, I said, why your father, the champion of Scottish engineering, is driving an American car? She pulled herself up and she said, that is a Buick, a 1929 Buick, she said. I said, and Mr. Buick was from Arbroath. Did you know that? Did you know that? And by the way, he perfected the carburetor. He didn't get rich on it. Somebody took advantage. So they always drove Buicks because Mr. Buick was from Arbroath. And he was very keen on keeping healthy and cycling to work and so forth. One of the apprentices trained by Bob Thompson, whose 40s was this man here, who sadly died about a month ago, Willie Black. And he began also at 14. As he said, the war was declared just shortly afterwards, and he thought it might be just a bit of an adventure to go and join up. And he said, but they wouldn't take us. This was a reserved occupation. And I'm going to let you hear him talking about that. Now, have I got this right? It takes a little.
Use the keypad on the.
I use the keypad on the. Oh, I might need rescued at this point. What do I? This is a little video. I thought I'd like to let you hear his voice, give you a break from my voice. Here we are. He's telling me. I said, what did you do during the war then? If you tank turrets.
So obviously you weren't going to be called up because that was your war state.
Oh yeah, well, no, we all got a car and twice for the Lindsay and I went thinking with the chap at the, you see, get the I've always thought with you have to do, he says, I would about a job. He says, you wouldn't take us until the war was. And then I used to be on making drums for, you've seen an aircraft.
Can you hear him?
And that cable that goes across. You know, there's a drum at each side. Which we would, another thing, they had a right hand drum and a right hand drum. And the cable was slack on the, you see, I'm doing it yet. That cable was across. The plane came down and I take it. It was a bolt right through by the tail with the engine block. It was a, well, it would be a bridge, something like that. But a shuttle thing, and that's what the cable. And these drums tightened it up, and that's how the aircraft could go over the range.
Such precision, and the thing was all out. So, would you say that?
I'll leave it there. So if you didn't hear him, he was describing what he did during the war, making or installing tank turrets, the ball bearings he described. And then the next part was, and we were making the arresting gear for aircraft carrier, the landing gear, and he describes how they did this. Everything he did, he was wonderfully descriptive with his hands and all told in his... so he... Then, when he stayed on with the firm and trained dozens and dozens of apprentices, all of them turning up. When the school leaving age changed to 15, there was often an option for them to do 1 year of training in a technical college at every skill they might possibly encounter, but not choosing any, hoping, however, that at that time they might find one I really like that. So if they wanted to be, for example, a pattern maker or a moulder or whatever it might be, or in design, they would be able to go on that avenue with a firm and be trained on the job, again with the same challenges of the previous generation. I happened to notice round the table there was four engineers sitting at a table when I was talking to them, and I noticed that 2 out of 4 had missing fingers. So I thought I might delicately tread onto or stray into the area of health and safety. I presume that's all part of your training. Well, health and safety, I just thought I'd ask. So, "How did you lose the top of your thumb?" said I. "Willie Black, the man you've just heard." And he was, the other men who were trained by him spoke of him in the most absolutely, if any of the teachers, by the way, have this kind of report from your students, you will be glowing with 5 stars everywhere you walk. But he does have a missing thumb, was the point. I said, "Well, how did you lose the top of your thumb?" He says, "Well, I'd only been there about a year when I lost it. Partly my own fault. We were on piecework and, I took off the back of my machine thinking I could go faster and make more money. A right-hand screw and a left-hand screw. So back with my lathe. And I took my guard off. I was good at it. But the next thing I was standing, I must have moved, and whoosh, quick as a flash, it juggled a bit off the top. And I had to go to the hospital. And do you know, it was Christmas Day. We worked Christmas Day in the days. Anyway, I remember taking there with me, all wrapped up in a bandage, and I'm sitting there in a wee room, and the sister came in with her uniform, and she says, "Look at the state of your hand." I says, "Well, it has to be dirty. I've been working all day." She says, "Give that to me." And she pulls in to the wash hand basin, she gets the carbolic soap and the scrubbing brush, in she goes, nae bother. I could have seen her far enough. It was worse than getting the tap of my thumb. Anyway, she takes me to the man, a surgeon, and he was going to mend it, sort the tap off it and take that wee flap over. But you know this? He didn't do it right. Because she left a wee bit of that nail bed. So I went back and I says, I said, "Can you not take that wee bit away? Because I have to keep filing that wee bit of nail." He says, "I'll have to start all over again. You'll have to go through the system." I said, "Well, I'm not doing that. But you see, I can always use it. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well," said he, showing the not very good surgery on his thumb. So it served a really good purpose. Through the various departments, there was a bit of a hierarchy. The design people, they were the sort of top brass. And apparently they used to tell the others, "Well, if you're no good at that, you'll be down in the turning shop. Oh gosh, if you can't do that, you'll be in the fitting shop," and on it went. And when I interviewed this man here, the moulder, he was in the foundry, and he said it was the filthiest, worst job in the world, next to coal mining. That it was cold, or it could be too hot, and it was dangerous. He's retired now, and I thought, well, I'd like to go and see him in action. So he had described all the various stages in his work. But I was a bit curious as to why he'd retired, but he kept a little foundry in his garage. So I asked him if I could go and visit him, and he also kept his 1936 Rudge motorcycle there. As he said, "You can't get the parts though." Whereupon I said, "So what are you making?" And this is what he explained to me. "What do I do now? This is another week. Do I just... no, that's not right. I would like to play this week." I didn't pay attention. I make a hopeless apprentice. That one. Okay. So he's going to describe to you. Had to put a sleeve on it.
Is this for your own right? So this
Looks a bit distorted.
Which bit did you point to that you made? You made this brass bit. And you had to cast that. How amazing. And
Not for a mug.
No, for a mug.
that is something else. Is this a one-off, and how incredible. So how long would that kind of a job take? With all this precision and care. Oh my word, but gosh, that is quite something. I think he is, yes, he is oversimplifying.
There's a bit of a distortion, so I'm going to whisk on. Anyhow, he describes how he did it. But I was intrigued by the tools. I had never seen any of these tools. There was one looked kind of like a trowel, but not. So I said, "If you would tell somebody who knows nothing what the tools are, could you explain them to me?" Aye, he said, "New tools will no do you any good. They're hopeless. You have to find old tools. So you find an old guy who's going to retire, and you're really nice to him, and he'll leave them for you. Or you make them yourself." I said, "Do they have special names?" "Oh, aye," he said. And he describes them all. I won't go through them all because they have quite remarkable names. the term, the book, the glossary, I used a glossary of welding and moulding terms. It's got over 1,000 terms in it, and none of these names are in it. So here you go. Well, he says, you had a troon, I think they call it trowel somewhere else, anyhow, you had a wee troon, and then you had a finishing troon, and this long-bladed knife as a cleaner, and he says, and then there's, wait till I get this for you. Where's that wee, oh here. This is the Duke's Neb. Any Scots speakers among you? The Duke's Neb, what does that mean? No Scots speakers. The duck's bill. The Duke's Neb. The duck's beak. And they all have Scots names, and some of them are made of brass, and he described what each one did quite remarkably and what they were used for in the various callings of his work. Of course, the various departments had their various tools of the trade, and when they laid them out, and I think Gonzalo, you photographed those, it was rather interesting to see each one. There were of course no computers, and it was not decimalised. They worked to 1,000th of an inch. That was the standard, 1,000th of an inch. For some reason in Scotland we don't pay a whole lot of attention to our great engineers. And if you look all over Scotland to find something to Kirkcaldy engineers, you might just stumble upon this. It's not very imposing, and it's to Sanford's Fleming, who trained in Kirkcaldy with the firm John Sang and Company. Anybody heard of him? Any Canadians here? There's the Sanford University, called after him. They have a whole university in Canada. No, not us. That's far too much praise. They might go to your head. And what did he do? Well, he started at 13 and he was an engineer by 19. So he had done all the various stages. When it came to construction and engineering design, he happened to be lucky enough to have a bit of his apprenticeship on the Forth Rail Bridge. And he also got to work on things like the Kirkcaldy Harbour improvements and waterways, the viaducts. And in his 5 years between the age of 13 and 19, he learned quite a lot. But as soon as he was finished, you get your papers, as they call them. You get no degree after your name. You're just an engineer. Away he went on the next emigrant ship to Canada. And this is actually during the potato famine. So this is the boy, trained in this firm in Kirkcaldy, who introduced iron railway bridges to Canada, stopped them from building wooden ones for the Canadian Pacific Railway. This is the boy who, at the age of 21, made the improved design of ice skates. No, you can't have that. And he also mapped Toronto Harbour. He had a myriad of achievements that would fill books. In Scotland, we don't know about him. And by the way, they were designing their first postage stamp and scratching their heads, wondering what they might do. Don't you worry, he says, I did a wee bit in the moulding shop in Kirkcaldy. And so he moulded that little beaver that's on the Canadian 3-cent stamp, and that produced the first stamps. And when his railway was ready, he noticed that, oh gosh, if you leave Vancouver at dawn, it's not dawn in Halifax. So he's the boy who divided up the time zones and worked out that when it's, he based it on Greenwich Mean Time, and that it'll be, and Canada with its various time zones would have to have a coordinating timetable. And he tried it out on the railway whose bridges he helped design. Not bad for a Kirkcaldy engineer. And who was this company of Sang? There's a Sangs Road in Kirkcaldy. When I asked about it, people thought it was something to do with where they stood on Sang, but no. That was John Sang, engineer, the one who designed these arches. And his two daughters were wonderful mathematicians, and they're the ones who helped him what they did was, I'll tell you who they were, they computed huge logarithmic tables. The two girls, Jane and Flora Sang, are the women who did these logarithm tables that you won't use them now, but we used to have to learn to calculate by them. So it's quite an illustrious town. Kirkcaldy deserves some fame. Yes, there's songs about it as well. I'm very conscious of time. I can flick through the rest. That's basically the engineering project I did write their story in this little book, We Are the Engineers, and it's in their words with various other sections. But on the way, picked up the hydro scheme. This is a dam that's just in behind Comrie and Crieff, and it's got these buttress supports which look very interesting, and it's worked on. It's one of the later ones, 1960. There are a lot of immigrant workers, many from Donegal in Ireland, but some Polish, Czechoslovakian and German workers as well. Health and safety, well, don't ask. But the oldest woman in the glen, and we interviewed her at 102, she described living up that glen there, and these Irish men came in with their work permits. The red, by the way, are the tunnels that connect the various dams in that scheme. It's the Bridalban scheme, and it's of course taking advantage of a body of water with a tunnel and then the dam, and you'd get this huge fall of water and the turbines driving that. So there they are, tea and cigarettes, the diet, and they lived there. They broke the world record for tunnelling, 557 feet in a week, but a lot of them paid a very high price. If you look at the photograph, Mitchell Construction, you would see a hard hat among them. There was not too many facilities there, but did you know there were 39 men died in Cruachan? 39. Horrendous. But for them, most of them didn't see 50 because they all had lung diseases. The dust was horrendous and they didn't wear masks. So although they got big money, they paid a big price. I asked about job satisfaction, and I thought I might like to end on that. Who should I ask about job satisfaction? I'll ask the guy who had the filthiest, dirtiest job in the whole lot. Yes, the one who was the moulder. I said, so what's job satisfaction? And he stood with his overalls, as you saw him, and he scratched his head and he says, do you ken Burns's poem, The Twa Dugs? I said, I did, but I couldn't recite it off by heart. Well, he said, it's twa dugs. And there's one dog belongs to the gentry, and there's one, by the way, it says dogs. Woof! Yes, those. In case you didn't say twa dugs, but Burns calls them the twa dugs. And the gentry one is called Caesar. He's rather noble. He has a very luxurious life. He goes on walks, shooting parties, and he eats the best of things, and he lies by the fireside. And the other one is a working collie, the kind that we had in Skye. And he works really hard all day long, up around herding sheep, cattle, you name it, and at night, and he gets pretty modest fare for eating. He catches his own rabbits sometimes, and at night he collapses in the barn and he's fast asleep. So, which life would you want, he said. And he quoted the first one. But tell me, Master Caesar, sure great folks' life's a life of pleasure. Nae cold, nae hunger can e'er steer them. The very thought or nothing fears them. And the gentry dog says to the collie, it's not like that. You just think this is a great life. But at the end of the day, you can lie down with a real fatigue, and there's a big long poem, I won't read it to you. You can lie down at the end of the day, and when you sleep the sleep of honest toil, you have a wonderful sleep and wake in the morning ready, looking forward to a new day, because you're out in the air, you're exercising, you're challenged, it's all of that. And in fact, that's actually the best life. So that's job satisfaction, he said. And by the way, he said, there's more to life than engineering. I'll go fly fishing, and he rhymes, I've got my bike, he goes to TT races, and on it went. There's got to be more to life than engineering. I think my father would have agreed with that. So what can I say to it all? I hope you think it's worth recording what Scottish engineering did, or what Scottish engineers did. So what did I say to him when he said that that's job satisfaction? I said, well, I'll have to reply in the words of the man who did an apprenticeship in flax dressing, Robert Burns himself. From scenes like these, old Scotia's grandeur springs, that makes her loved at home, revered abroad. Princes and lords are worth the breath of kings, but an honest man's the noblest work of God. Thanks for listening.
This production is brought to you by the University of Edinburgh.